Welcome to the stage Kevin Slagle, Senior Vice President of Communications for the American Petroleum Institute.
Good morning. Good morning and welcome to the 2025 API State of American Energy. I'm Kevin Slagle. I'm Senior Vice President for Communications at API. And we are so pleased to have you with us here today as we celebrate American energy. We are also excited to continue the work that the voters of this country want us to do, and that is to seize the opportunity to restore U.S. energy dominance. That's right. That's right. So today we're joined by many friends and leaders, and there's a lot of terrific folks I need to introduce, so if you could just please hold your applause until the end. First off, Hess Corporation CEO and API Board Chair, John Hess. And API board members Chris Golden of Equinor and Steve Hightower of Hightowers Petroleum. We are also honored to have a lot of members of Congress and their staffs here with us today, including Henry Cuellar, Julie Johnson, and Mark Vesey of Texas, Bob Latta of Ohio, and another longtime friend and former Congressman, Adam Putnam of Florida. We also want to thank the many partners that we have with us here today, so why don't we give everybody a big hand of applause. So of course today just isn't a Washington event. It's also about the people across this country in every corner of America that power our nation. The nearly 11 million jobs our industry supports form the backbone of American energy. From the hardworking people on rigs, at refineries, in classrooms, and communities large and small across this country, the state of American energy is a collective story of those who power not just this industry, but the strength of our nation. Last year at this event, a lot of the focus was on the challenges facing our industry. This year, we're pleased to be able to talk about opportunity. The opportunity to restore American energy dominance, to help reduce inflation, create jobs, to secure our nation, and to grow an economy that works for everyone. So let's begin by hearing from the leaders committed to restoring and advancing this energy dominance. First up, we'll hear from API President Mike Sommers with Senate Majority Leader John Thune and Chairman Mike Hess of API. Next, API Executive Vice President Amanda Eversole will do the same with House Natural Resources Committee Chairman Bruce Westerman. And finally, Mike will come back up and close this event with a speech detailing how our 5-point roadmap will lead to the next chapter of energy leadership. In closing, since API does set the global standards on operational excellence, environmental progress, and safety, you need to know that there are no planned emergency drills today. If we need to evacuate, we will let you know over the loudspeakers. Exits are to your right and in the back of this space. Safety first, safety always. So as you'll hear, our opportunity today and in the future and the weeks ahead are immense. And together, we can ensure America's energy advantage not just powers today and the immediate future, but decades of secure and prosperous times ahead. So we hope you enjoy your time with us this morning, and we thank you so much for joining us.
Welcome to the stage, Mike Sommers, President and CEO of the American Petroleum Institute, in conversation with Senate Majority Leader John Thune.
Welcome to the 2025 State of American Energy. It is such an honor to be here with you today, and a true honor to have with us today the new Majority Leader of the United States Senate, John Thune.
Thanks, Mike.
So John, you and I have known each other for a very long time. In fact, when I was a young staffer in the Longworth building, Your office was right next to ours, and it's such an honor to be here today. Could you have imagined back in those days when you were a young member of Congress that you'd be Majority Leader of the United States Senate?
Well, probably on the 5th floor of the Cannon building. No, at that time, the elevator didn't go all the way up there. You had to take stairs to get to the top floor. But no, it's been a great ride, and obviously learned a lot along the way. And I appreciate, honestly, Mike, the House background I think is really important, and especially now we have unified control of the government, House, Senate, and White House, making sure that they're working together and everybody's rowing in the same direction. Understanding, kind of how the House works and the culture, I think is important. So I'm very grateful for that background and where we started together those many years ago.
Well, we today, one of the big things that we're going to be talking about is what we call the American energy opportunity. That because of this new consolidated government that we have a tremendous opportunity to get big things done for the American people. One of the things that API is going to be rolling out today is our API 5-point policy roadmap as a way to secure our energy future and also reduce inflation. You have an opportunity too, a historic opportunity with consolidated government, with a new president coming in, and with a House of Representatives that is in Republican hands as well. Can you talk to me about some of the things you're going to focus on from an energy perspective as you take the majority?
Well, I mean, I think as you point out, it is a huge opportunity, and having an administration that actually is pro-energy development, working with the Congress, where we want to be supportive in any way that we can in ensuring that the President and his team have success in making America energy dominant. And that happens on a lot of fronts. I mean, a lot of it, you look at the Biden administration policies with regard to banning certain areas to exploration, the heavy-handed regulatory approach that they've taken, which has, I think, had a stifling effect on energy in this country, permitting reform. There's a whole range of things that I think we can and should and will be doing. And a lot of it, in the tax space, the regulatory space, everything with an eye toward making America energy dominant. I think this is an opportunity for an energy renaissance in this country. And, a long time in the making, it will make energy less expensive to people in this country, make us less dependent upon hostile and, adversaries around the world when it comes to our energy needs, and hopefully our ability to be a supplier of energy to some of our allies around the world. So as we think through that agenda, a lot of it's regulatory, a lot of it's on the tax side, some of it's legislative, as I said, trying to come up with easing some of the permitting regulations and requirements. I think there's a whole range of things available. And we have a shared interest in E15, which is something that we didn't get done in the last Congress, and I hope we get done in this one.
So one of the things that we're a little bit concerned about is, of course, President Trump has made it clear that he's for this energy dominance agenda. And there are going to be a number of executive orders on day one. We want to make sure that that stuff is durable. So how do we make sure that that legislative agenda gets done? What can we do to ensure that it doesn't just stop with executive orders, but continues on to legislation?
I think as much as possible, you want to complement what the administration does by executive order through legislation and through funding. And we have talked, of course, I think as you know, about using a legislative vehicle that is available to you when you have unified control of the government. If you have House, Senate, and White House, budget reconciliation is what it's referred to. And it enables you in the Senate to do things at 51 votes that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do. So typically in the Senate, as I think most people know, there's a supermajority requirement on most consequential legislation. The exception to that is budget reconciliation. And so as we've looked at what is available to us, and frankly, the Democrats expanded the scope of reconciliation through their two budget reconciliation vehicles in the last couple of years, ARPA, the American Rescue Plan, and then the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. And so we're looking at how we can build on that, use that template, to find ways to get the funding that's necessary, legislative authority, et cetera, when it comes to the energy space. And so we're examining that. We've got committees, the Energy Committee, which Mike Lee will be chairing, of course, Environment, Public Works, Shelley Capital will be chairing, and the Finance Committee, Mike Crapo, I'm a member of that committee, and we're all working collectively to find the best ways to achieve that objective and to make whatever we do as durable as possible. I mean, one of the things that we're looking at in the tax space, we've got to extend all the 2017 tax cuts, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the Trump tax cuts of 2017 before the end of the year, or you'll see a huge tax increase, a $4.5 trillion tax increase, much of which, or about half of which, will hit people making less than $400,000 a year. So in trying to extend that, we'd like to make it permanent. And permanence has certainty associated with it, as people make investment decisions, and then they know. And I think that's an objective that we have as part of this, but we want to complement legislatively as much as we can the things that the administration will try and do by executive order and by executive action.
So one of the things that I've been telling everyone about our industry is that we're not asking for anything big in the reconciliation bill. We want to be makers, not takers. We want to be able to help you fund some of your other priorities. So that means how do we open up more federal access to both federal lands and federal waters? Those are key areas where we're really focused on. So we hope as you consider reconciliation that that'll be a top priority or two. But one of the things that I wanted to ask is the pressing question that I think everybody wants to know. One bill or two?
Yeah, right. I never thought there, obviously that's an obsession in this town. Nobody 800 meters from the Capitol cares whether it's one bill or two bill. They just care about what's in it. But it's kind of the parlor game we're now playing. And, however it happens, and we're working through that, one thing is certain, we've got to extend the tax relief before the end of the year. We want to use it as a vehicle to secure the border, which is a huge priority for not only the administration, but for many of us in Congress. And of course, all of our members campaigned on that. And then we want to use it to rebuild our military. And then finally, of course, as I mentioned, for energy dominance. And I think what you talked about doing is opening up some of these areas, streamlining the regulatory process, making it easier, not harder, and less expensive, not more expensive, to develop American energy resources. That's what our objective is all about. And I think it's it's a huge opportunity. It doesn't come along very often, and sometimes doesn't last very long. 2 years from now, we could lose the House, we could lose the Senate. So you have to really maximize the opportunity you have in front of you, and we're trying to figure out how to do that. And the process of how we get there, whether it's one bill or two bills, is an open question. I've argued, as I think you probably know, that there's a real opportunity here to put up some early wins, knowing that we've got to get the tax stuff done in a vehicle later this year, but to deal with energy, to deal with the border, to deal with national security early on.
So one of the other big, powerful tools that Congress has when you have unified government like this is the CRA, the Congressional Review Act, which allows fast-track authority to reverse some of these midnight regulations that we've seen from President Biden. There are a couple of them that are ripe for that. Can you talk through some of the ways that you're thinking about getting this done as some of the day 1, 2, 3 actions?
There are, and we are scrubbing right now to determine what is eligible for that. The Congressional Review Act allows Congress to, with certain regulatory actions, sort of reverse or repeal those through a Congressional Review Act resolution. And so when you talk about CRAs, as we examine, there are a couple of them we were hoping the tailpipe emission, it doesn't fit within there's a certain look-back period, and it doesn't fit within that, so we're not going to be able to use it there. But we are looking for lots of opportunities in that space and trying to argue with the parliamentarian and obviously with others about the whole California waiver issue and how to reverse that, because that was such a radical regulatory overreach. And so trying to figure out a way to roll that back, and we're going to continue those efforts. As I said, our committee chairs and our team are looking at how do we fit that within the parameters of a CRA action that would enable us to do something about that, because that's got to be fixed.
Yeah, what California did was completely radical. And the fact that 17 other states who've waived into this are going to be subject to it, it could completely change the vehicle market. So we would highly encourage you to look at that as an option for the CRA, and we believe that you can do it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I know you do, and we'll keep hopefully partnering up with you, because it is that important. 35% by 26 and 100% by 2035. It's just, the craziness that continually comes out of California. And Lord knows our hearts and thoughts and prayers are with all those folks out there right now with what they're dealing with. But from the regulatory governance standpoint, some of the things that they do are just so counterintuitive and frankly counter to making America energy dominant. We've got to fix that.
You don't think that a rancher in South Dakota wants a Ford Lightning as his primary vehicle?
Go figure, right? Yeah. The take-up rate's not going to be real high on EVs in western South Dakota, I can assure you. Yeah.
Let's shift gears a little. One of our top priorities going into next year, as it has been for many, many years, has been to get permitting reform done. It feels like we're always on the cusp of getting it done, but we can never get it across the finish line. One of the things that I'm going to talk about today is everything else in the API 5-point roadmap really depends on getting comprehensive permitting reform done. Right. So I'd love to get your perspective on whether this is possible this year.
Well, I hope that it is. There are a lot of questions swirling around whether or not that is eligible for budget reconciliation. The conventional wisdom is not, that it's more policy-oriented than revenue-oriented, and that's a distinction for budget reconciliation. It can't be principally about policy. It has to be about spending or revenue. And but there was a sort of bipartisan approach, which almost got enacted at the end of the year. John Barrasso worked on a bill with Joe Manchin, which had a lot of good components in it. It didn't have everything that we wanted in it, but it was a good starting point. But I'm hopeful that with the new Congress, as the House begins their work on it, that we can find some Democrats in the Senate that would enable us to enact permitting reform at the traditional 60-vote threshold. And part of that, I think, will happen because there are a lot of Democrats, and particularly even on the far left, who have projects that they want to see advance that are being blocked right now as well, just because it takes so darn long to get siting and permitting and everything else. So streamlining that process, again, making it easier and not harder and less expensive, not more expensive, and not getting bogged down in the courts for literally decades. I mean, there are projects out there that get stalled out, and that shouldn't happen. I mean, this is a country that has enormous resources, environmentally sound ways of developing those resources, and in a way that can not only meet our country's needs, and there's going to be a huge demand for energy in the foreseeable future. You look at what the needs of our economy are going to be, and we just flat have to do it. And it's a national security issue too, and I think people sometimes lose sight of that.
That's right. Yeah, we believe that permitting reform has to include judicial reform, reforms to NEPA, and it has to address the Clean Water Act as well. And I do think that we can find bipartisan compromise on that. Yeah. One of the big things that I think we have concerns about is just the ongoing regulatory onslaught that we've felt from the Biden administration. I'm hoping that in this year we can also think about how we future-proof future administrations from doing the same kind of regulatory onslaught. So there's been a lot of talk even in your caucus about even enacting the RAINS Act. Can you talk us through how you think about broader regulatory reform as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of the RAINS Act. Essentially what that would do is it would subject some of these really overreaching and frankly very expensive regulatory actions taken by an administration to a vote in the Congress. And if there's a certain dollar threshold that is reached, then Congress would end up having to vote on it to validate it. And I think that makes all the sense in the world, because what we've seen is, and frankly, I will say this, I think the one thing that, if you look at the first Trump term, the number of judges who went on the courts, 234, I think, if you add up the circuit, the appellate court, the district courts, and then the Supremes. But those three noms to the Supreme Court and some of the rulings that are coming out there, the Loper decision, which rolled back Chevron deference, is huge. I mean, it really does neuter the administrative state. I think it's a transformational type decision. Now, what does it do? Perhaps gets you into court more too, and that's something obviously we want to address. But as we think about ways to make, when changes are made through the regulatory state, if you will, how do you ensure that there is accountability with the Article 1 branch of the Congress, or of the Constitution with the Congress, and ensure that some of those actions that are frankly hostile in many cases, in this case to energy production, are, one, we can get them rolled back, but two, subject them to a higher threshold before they can be implemented. And so I think there's a role, obviously, for the judiciary there, the Article III branch of the government. I also think there's a role for the Congress. And the REINS Act would be a great way to do that. And again, it's a question of whether or not we can get that past the threshold that's necessary to include it in reconciliation. But there are a lot of conversations around that.
That's great. I want to shift gears a little bit to the international space as well. We've talked a lot about domestic, but we live in a very dangerous world right now. So I want to talk first about LNG exports to Europe. Of course, the Biden administration imposed a ban on new export terminals at the end of last year. How is Congress thinking about that? And I know it could be subject to a day one reversal by President Trump as well.
Yeah, and I hope that is something that day one they address. Again, that's another example of Biden administration policies that just appear to be very anti-energy, frankly. And so, and if you look at what's happening around the world today, as you point out, it is a very dangerous world, which is why we believe that America has to be prepared to face the threat matrix that exists out there. And part of that is military readiness. It's increasing our top line on defense. And that's one of the issues. We've got a lot of folks who are very interested in being able to use perhaps reconciliation to increase the defense budget in ways that would be hard to do under regular order to make sure that we're prepared to deal with those national security threats. But another way that we deal with that, of course, is energy production, because so many of our allies learned the hard way that when you become dependent upon hostile nations, adversary nations for energy, it comes back to bite you. And we certainly saw that with Ukraine, or with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the impact that had on Europe, particularly when it comes to natural gas. So making America, again, more of a resource supplier, not just for American needs, but also for those around the world, I think and our allies around the world, makes the world safer and less dangerous, because some of our allies aren't as subject to hostile regimes.
So you're from a big ag state, South Dakota, and a lot of your work has been to promote American agricultural products overseas. So the new Trump administration is considering changing our trade policy. I want to know how you and the Senate majority are thinking about potential tariffs with some of our trading partners.
Well, it's the conversation around tariffs is a whole new one. And the president obviously is a big believer in tariffs, and as are many people that will populate his administration. Those of us who represent agricultural states have more of a perhaps nuanced view on that, and I think part of it shaped by just the impact that tariffs have in terms of retaliatory actions taken by other countries around the world. So as we think through those policies, I've always believed that tariffs are used selectively, used in a targeted way, represent a good remedy in many cases if there are countries that we're doing business with that are cheating. And I like that approach. I think it does serve a purpose. I think sort of uniform across the board tariffs could be largely problematic in a lot of ways. But we'll work through that. We're starting to have those conversations. Clearly, there are different views among members of Congress on this. And in many cases, again, if you represent an agricultural state, you think of the amount, the volume of South Dakota soybeans, for example, that go to China. It's a half to 2/3. And so there is a symbiotic relationship that we have with some of these countries around the world when it comes to our economies, and that's obviously going to be a consideration for those of us who represent states like that.
So I want to end here on a positive note. Obviously, the United States Senate is set up to be a place for bipartisan compromise. And we think that the things that are most durable, the things that we can actually depend on in the future, get done on a bipartisan basis. I just want to ask you, who are some of the people that we should be working with? Who are some of the bipartisan leaders that we might be able to get something comprehensive on energy done in the next Congress?
Well, as you know, you lost a couple with Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, but somebody's going to step into that void. And I think there are some Democrats that you can work with, at least I hope you can, on energy issues. Anybody who studies or is a student of American the American economy, or for that matter, America's national security interest, realizes what an important role energy plays. And so I think on these issues like permitting reform, there are, I would say the Virginia senators, the New Hampshire senators. John Fetterman has proven to be kind of somebody who's willing to move in his own direction on occasion. And so we're looking for who those people are. Who are the folks that are going to step into that gap? Angus King, who's an independent from Maine, I hope is somebody that kind of fits into that mold. But as you have those conversations with people, obviously we're interested in what you're hearing back too, because you do need to get anything consequential done in the United States Senate, absent reconciliation, which again is only available in limited circumstances and with pretty tight restrictions about how you use it. You have to have 60 votes in the Senate, which means with 53 Republicans, even if we hold every Republican, we've got to have 7 Democrats. So who are those people that are going to be willing, in the interest, I think, of what in our national security interests, our economic security in this country, willing to work with Republicans in a bipartisan way? And I'm a believer in that. I think it's gotten harder in the last few years. The incentive structure in Congress has changed a lot in the last couple of decades. But there's still, to do meaningful things that have durability over time, as you point out, and not subject to one administration or one Congress to the next that can flip things back and forth. Things done in a bipartisan way have that durability, and that creates the certainty that I think you and your members and companies want.
Join me in thanking John Thune, the Majority Leader of the United States Senate.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. You're the best.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure. Thanks, guys. Thank you all. Thanks.
Welcome to the stage, John Hess, CEO of Hess Corporation and Chairman of the Board of Directors for the American Petroleum Institute.
Boy, what an honor to go from John Thune to John Hess. Many of you know John. He is a true legend in the oil and gas business, and he's going to give us some perspective on his thoughts on the oil and gas industry in 2025. John not only, of course, is the CEO of Hess Corporation, but he's also chairman of the API Board of Directors. Welcome, John.
Thank you. Honored to be here.
So, John, let's start out with kind of a broad question. What are you seeing in energy markets today?
Right. Well, just focus on oil for a second. When we started the year, I'd say we started the year with negative sentiment. Really between September and December of last year, China stopped growing. In fact, oil demand that you used to depend on China to be sort of the engine of demand growth in oil every year, 300,000 to 500,000 barrels a day, actually we think year versus year was negative. So their economy really was ground to a halt. And that had an impact on the psychology of the oil market. So we started the year with people looking at last year, there were inventory draws between supply and demand in the oil market. And people this year were saying they're going to be builds, maybe 1 million barrels a day. Fortunately, a couple of factors are going our way that have strengthened the market. First is weather. Weather matters. This is going to be the coldest January, and I know Washington's feeling it, London's feeling it when you see snow on the ground, but degree days matter. They matter for oil, they matter for gas. So we're starting the year for oil demand on the right foot, several 100,000 barrels a day higher than a year ago because of it being cold, the coldest January in the last 10 years. Second factor, I wouldn't bet against China 2 years in a row. They're going to do everything they can to stimulate their economy, so I think their oil demand year versus year will actually be on an upward trajectory this year. And then the United States. Obviously, with President Trump and the legislature being united, I think that's going to be a stimulus for the economy. Some people worry that that's going to mean higher inflation and higher interest rates. But the reason we have higher inflation and higher interest rates is because the economy is doing well. So it's actually, we're going to have to learn to live with that inflation. But at the end of the day, I think demand's going to be stronger than people thought. So when you look out for 2025, I think, the market's going to be in balance. I don't think you're going to have the builds that people think for oil that'll depress the price. And then the other factor, geopolitics. And the oil price just went up $4 a barrel in the last week. Sanctions on Russia, potentially sanctions on Iran. And that obviously creates some uncertainty about supply. So all these factors together, I think, you're probably in a $70 to $80 market when it comes to Brent crude, and WTI is a couple of dollars less. But at the end of the day, I think, we're going to have sort of an equilibrium price. You have to adjust for the political risk factor, but hopefully that market will stabilize with time.
Yeah, so President Biden just announced a whole new round of sanctions in Russia. That did certainly have an impact. And I would expect that President Trump, at least in the short term, is going to continue those. So you talked a little bit about that impact. You've operated all over the world. Talk us through what that impact is. It seems like the Russia, that ghost fleet out there, they're really focused on that now. And a lot of those barrels probably won't make it to market now.
Yeah, the initial numbers that are out there are up to 1 million barrels a day of impact of supply that might have trouble getting into the market from Russia. That could be another 1 million barrels a day of Iran. If that happens, the market's going to tighten. Prices are going up. You're already starting to see that. I do think, there are producers, specifically in Saudi Arabia and some members of OPEC, that have excess capacity that could be brought on the market to stabilize the market. So I would imagine if those sanctions got sticky and stayed with us for a while, we'd be looking at that as a way of sort of keeping prices under control.
So as chairman of API, we, of course, you've helped us advance the API 5-point policy roadmap. You've known President Trump for a very long time. Hess is the only oil corporation still based in New York City.
Right.
So you've dealt with the president for many, many years. You surely at some point are going to have an opportunity to meet with President Trump. What would you tell him?
Okay, well, first, even though he knows this, and the Senate leader, who is, a great leader for our country, John Thune, want to be energy dominant. President Trump is the greatest champion of that. But I think the first point is just to remind him, his administration, and all of us in America that oil and gas are going to be here for decades. Oil and gas are a strategic industry for our country. You talked about the 11 million jobs, more jobs than the automotive industry, aviation industry, that's direct and indirect, lower electric costs than most parts of the world by a factor of 2 to 3, maybe even 4 when it comes to Europe in terms of what we pay for electricity here, and that we're totally energy secure. Our national security, we're independent of other countries. We're a net exporter, where China imports 70% of their oil and Europe imports 70% of their oil. So it's a real strong point. We're the largest oil and gas producer in the world, mainly because of shale. So at the end of the day, that energy dominance is just a theme that we need to build around. And specifically, there are 3 suggestions I would make to President Trump. The first is putting a priority on making our country AI dominant in the world. And to do that, you need to focus on natural gas. Some people talk about nuclear. Nuclear is 10 years away from it having an impact to basically be the fuel that we need and energy that we need to supply the electric generation in our country. It's got to be natural gas, so we need to streamline permitting, whether it's for electric plants, whether it's for transmission, whether it's for pipelines, or whether it's for distribution. So let's be AI dominant, and you can do that by being natural gas dominant. That's number one. Number two is, and the API and you personally, Mike, along with Amanda and your team, have been outspoken on this. We need to focus on repealing and revising the tailpipe rules that the Biden administration put in, and also the CAFE standards. They are way tilted to electric vehicles. to where there's almost an EV mania. It's gotten to the point of ridiculousness where the Ford 150 that's out there, instead of pricing at about $80,000 a vehicle, is pricing at about $48,000 to meet the CAFE standards. So basically, Ford is discounting their price just to meet their EV mandates. That's stupid. We're all for EVs. We're all for consumer choice, one of your 5 points that we need to get out there. But hybrid vehicles have a great role to play in internal combustion engines. Let consumers make their choice. So at the end of the day, we won't be so dependent on EVs for China. Most people don't realize that China, in terms of batteries, controls 75% of critical materials in the world for batteries, as well as the processing for those critical materials. So actually, if we were all EV vehicles in our country, we would be more dependent upon China for the EV vehicles instead of using our liquid gold, as President Trump talks, of the oil, to be our energy security. So at the end of the day, that's another area where, repealing and revising both the CAFE standards and tailpipe standards, I think, would play to our energy dominance. And the last but not least is the SPR. Leader Thune was just talking about not wanting to be dependent upon others. Henry Kissinger put the SPR in place in 1974 and the IEA in place in 1974 to deal with energy interruptions, oil interruptions. And what most people don't realize is while it was absolutely right for us to use the SPR to deal with the vertical risks that we had in prices when Russia invaded Ukraine, we took our SPR reserves of crude from 600 million barrels to 400 now. We need to refill that. And the Biden administration was asleep at the wheel in terms of doing that. 2 years ago, I found out that while we could take 1 million barrels a day out of the SPR, we only could put 150,000 barrels a day back in. Do American people know that? I think it's very irresponsible that the Biden administration put us in that position. I said, you got to do something, change your piping, change your engineering, so you can put the 1 million barrels a day back in that you took out. And they said, yeah, we're working on it. Well, a year later, I went back to them and talked to them about it, and they hadn't done one thing. So I think it's irresponsible. I think that's an area that we need to get on right away to refill the SPR to 600 million barrels for energy security, not just for our country, but also the world. At the end of the day, energy policy is about 3 things. It's about energy security, energy affordability, and energy transition. And most people don't realize that while well-intended targets, and you have this in the climate policy for the API, have been to reach net zero, at the end of the day, the carbon budget that the world needs to reach net zero is going to be used up in 2030. So we need to be clear-eyed to understand that we need to balance the 3 factors that I just said. And when you conclude from that, oil and gas are going to be needed for decades.
Thank you. Great answer to that question. So you operate all over the world. You have significant plays in the Bakken in North Dakota and in the deep water in Guyana, as well as the Gulf of Mexico, of course. I want to hear you talk through what are the prospects for shale, what are the prospects for deep water?
Sure. Well, shale, there's been a shale revolution, but people don't realize it's 20 years old. And it's taken U.S. oil production from 5 million barrels a day to 13.5 million barrels a day. The Permian's part of it, the Bakken where we operate, North Dakota's part of it, and obviously the Eagle Ford and also in Colorado. So it's been transformational. It's really a function of American ingenuity to take this tight rock that nobody thought could produce and frack it, which is very safe, a good safety record. And it's American ingenuity at its best. It also, at the end of the day, has made us, be more economic, have a competitive edge in our economics in the world. I talked about that earlier, and also secure. So as you've gotten more mature, it's gone from drill baby drill to show me the money. And basically it's gone from a growth industry to a harvest industry. And I think there's probably 200,000 barrels a day increase year-on-year growth this year and for the country as well as next year. And then it plateaus, but it plateaus for about 10 years. So the U.S., because of shale, is the number one oil producer in the world, the number one gas producer in the world. So, you know, in terms of our own company, part of that ingenuity is there. We use lean manufacturing in the Bakken. So 3 years ago, spud to spud for a well would be 13 days. 2 years ago, it was 12 days, and now it's 10 days. Other companies are doing similar things. Also on efficiency, people are drilling 3-mile laterals. In fact, our company not only does 3-mile laterals in the Bakken, where it used to be 2-mile laterals as a standard well, we're also the first producer to do 4-mile laterals. We just drilled in the Bakken, which we'll be completing soon. So I think American ingenuity, unleashed, is going to keep shale as a cornerstone of our energy dominance in the years ahead. Now, when you look at shale, I talked about it plateauing. If you assume, and we do assume, that oil will keep growing out to 2030, where's the oil going to come from? It's got to come from the deep water, and the Gulf of Mexico is a heartland for that. Basically, between 2014, when oil prices were low, and COVID, when oil prices went low again, the Gulf slowed down quite a bit. Where there were 8,000 blocks that were licensed to companies, it's about 2,000 blocks now. So the Gulf wasn't getting the attention that it used to get. Now it's having a renaissance. And new production's coming on. Over this year, oil production will go from 1,900,000 barrels a day of oil production to 2 million barrels a day, and there's more to come. Our company's going to be part of that. We just drilled a well called Pickerel that'll be adding about 10,000 barrels a day of production. Chevron, our merger partner-to-be, also is bringing new production on. So the Gulf is going to be a cornerstone of increased oil supply for our country and the world. And then you talk about Guyana, and we've been very fortunate as a company to be in a joint venture in Guyana. Current production is about 660,000 barrels a day. That number in 2030 is going to be about 1,700,000 barrels a day. This oil is going to be needed. So I think, in energy policy and American public, you have to realize that oil and gas are going to be needed for decades, and we need to keep investing in it, and we need to have sound policies, like your 5-point policy, to underpin that renaissance that we had starting 20 years ago, to continue that for another decade or two.
I'm so privileged to have John Hess as our chairman during this pivotal time. Join me in thanking him for his time. Great job. Thank you.
Welcome to the stage, Amanda Eversole, Executive Vice President and Chief Advocacy Officer for the American Petroleum Institute, in conversation with Congressman Bruce Westerman.
All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. Chairman Bruce Westerman is not only a phenomenal leader in the United States Congress, but also has a really unique background. You're an engineer, you're also a forester, and just deeply understand the natural resources that this country has been blessed with and how we can responsibly use them going forward. I do want to start with a question that's very serious. Of course, everybody is aware of the tragedy that continues to unfold in Los Angeles, and it's important that we recognize not only the lives that have been lost, but those people who have been impacted by this, the first responders who are assisting around the clock. And it's also important that we look ahead and think about how do we prevent another tragedy like this. And as the only forester in Congress, you've been outspoken, and I know that you have some specific ideas. So what do you think, Mr. Chairman?
Well, it is a huge tragedy what's happening out there, and you just have to see these fires to understand the magnitude of them. From a forestry perspective, these are some of the toughest conditions that you can deal with, because you've got these very steep canyons, and you've got more of a chaparral and shrub kind of trees. It's really thick, it's really dry. Then you put 70 to 100 mile an hour winds behind it, and when you look at fuel, heat, and oxygen, the three components of fire, you've got a very deadly mixture. Think about if you light a match and hold it straight up, the flame's small, but when you point the flame down, it goes up, heat and fire go uphill much faster. It's really, really hard to put these fires out once they get started, but we can create defensible zones in the wildland-urban interface that could help mitigate these disasters a lot. And I think it's a commentary on U.S. resources, how we're blessed with such wonderful, abundant resources, but we continually fail in the management of those resources. I mean, shifting from forestry, look at the 24 million acre ban that was just put on developing our resources on the Outer Continental Shelf. Those things have to change. We have to be better stewards of what we've got.
Well, I think that's a really, really important point. And as we think about the resources that this country was blessed with just 20 years ago, it was an entirely different conversation. And this country is a leader in production both of oil and gas. We are a net exporter of both. And there's really a link there, not only between our own energy security, but the opportunity for the American people. And I think in many ways, energy was on the ballot in this last election. And what the American people said is that affordability and reliability are incredibly important. And so how do you, as chairman of the House Natural Resources Committee, how do you think about unlocking our natural resources in the right way to benefit the American people?
Well, obviously, President Trump's made this a centerpiece of his campaign, and it'll be a centerpiece of the policies going forward in this Congress. And I like his terminology. We don't need to be energy independent. We need to be energy dominant. We need to use our energy not only to make America better, but also to help our allies across the world. It has a very strong link to national security and to our position in the global marketplace, what we do with our energy. And we've only just begun especially with the amount of natural gas that we have and the known deposits. We've got to be able to get those natural gas deposits to markets, which means we have to build pipelines, we have to be able to build LNG facilities, and we've got to produce more energy here in the United States. A report just came out about needing to double the amount of electricity by 2050. Well, where are those electrons going to come from? They're certainly not going to come from wind and solar, but we need to use all of our resources. I was reading Eric Schmidt's book, Genesis, talking about the race for AI, and I actually heard him speak at the Library of Congress, and he said to a room full of Republicans and Democrats, he said, forget about carbon emissions right now. He said, build every source of electrical energy that you can as fast as you can, because we cannot lose the AI race. And it really is that important that we become energy dominant, that we have abundant, reliable, affordable electricity and all forms of energy.
I think that's so important, and I'm a military spouse myself, and when we think about the sacrifices that the men and women who put on the uniform every day make for this country, you may not always think about oil and gas and what that means, but it's so linked. And when you look around the world, it's a very complicated geopolitical situation right now. And from your perspective, we've touched on a little bit, but how do you think about America's ability to continue to export our product from an oil and gas perspective? How does that matter from a geopolitical standpoint?
I mean, look at the war in Ukraine. Look at the war with Israel and Hamas, and you can make a connection that Putin's funding his aggression against Ukraine through energy sales. Look at who's funding Hamas. Look at who's funding Hezbollah and the Houthis. It's Iran, and they're funding it through energy sales. So if you want to look at it from a national security standpoint, we've got an opportunity to produce energy to put on the global market to, if you're a producer, you may not want to hear this, but lower prices for everyone, which includes lowering prices for Russia or pushing Russia or Iran out of the markets, and making U.S. gas and energy the preferred one in the marketplace. And we also know if you're concerned about the environment, we have a much smaller carbon footprint than energy produced anywhere else in the world. So everybody wins when America produces more energy.
Including the American worker. And there are 11 million Americans that work in and around this industry. And I see Sean McGarvey here with NABTU, and it is an incredibly important partnership that we have with our friends in the labor space. And I think that these jobs not only are important for families and communities, but I think that the importance of driving economic growth here in this country is really incredible. And I think as we extrapolate back maybe to the United States and think about our opportunity, we are sitting on, in this country, an incredible amount of resources that not only have we not had access to, but the technology continues to get better and better to minimize the footprint, but also maximize our ability to extract those resources. So in that vein, you referenced President Biden's action just last week to take 625 million acres off the map from our waters. And for those of you who don't know, about 25% of our production of oil comes on federal lands and waters. And as we're thinking about the growing demands from an electricity standpoint, you've got to power that generation from somewhere. So how should we be thinking about avoiding this kind of swings between administrations and really have thoughtful ability to access these resources on federal lands? What should we be thinking about differently?
I think as a country, we have to refocus our idea of what energy independence and energy dominance looks like. And we have to, you talked about me being a forester and an engineer. I tell people that those two professions aren't always appreciated because engineers think with logic and reason and foresters look at long-term horizons. And that gets overlooked by the political scientists sometimes. But we have to do the math. When you look at the global consumption of energy from 1800 to now, there's a great chart on the internet that shows it basically doubled in 1900 due to the Industrial Revolution. And when we were using pretty much all biomass, and then coal came along, and then you see oil and gas come along, and the global consumption of energy doubled again in the 1940s, doubled again in the 1960s, doubled again in the 1980s, and just recently doubled again. So we've seen 5 doublings of energy consumption, and if you know how to do an exponential graph, it's the true hockey stick. And wind and solar are just a speck up on the very tip of that chart, which says we can't abandon all these other forms of energy and think that we're somehow going to meet the global demand. So instead of demonizing certain fuel sources, we should be spending more efforts on R&D to get the very most out of every kind of fuel source that we have. While we're closing coal plants in the United States, China's building 40 gigawatts of coal every year. And to put that in perspective, there's a 650 megawatt coal plant in my district. I think it was the last one built in the United States in around 2010. China's building one of those every 5 days. And they're not even turning all of them on, which I think they're building the capacity so that as AI requires more energy, they're going to be able to turn these plants on. This is a real national security issue, and it's something that America has to take very serious. But the beauty of it is all the proven deposits of energy that we have here in the U.S. We've got the ability to produce the energy, and we could grow our nuclear energy as well. But all forms of energy, we need to be looking at ways to build more of it, to make it more reliable, affordable, and as clean as possible.
Yeah, well, of course, what a difference a year makes in terms of not only the way in which we're discussing our natural resources, but also the opportunity that we have ahead of us. And I think that's really the theme of what we're talking about today, which is America's energy opportunity. And part of that, with that opportunity, we really want to find durability. And so, the notion of just major swings every 2, 4, 6 years, depending on the political cycle, is really hard for this industry that makes very long-lived, capital-intensive investments. And so you're somebody that frequently finds ways to reach across the aisle and work with your friends in the Democratic Party. How do we think about durability as it relates not only from a legislative perspective, but from an energy policy perspective?
So this is something I've pondered a lot. I'm glad you brought that up. Going back to my engineering experiences, when we would do projects, the thing you needed more than anything else was certainty. And when people change their mind midstream, that throws the schedule off, that throws the budget off, it changes the scope of a project, and it's a disaster. So people who don't want to see energy development in our country and don't want to see natural resources development, they've learned how to be masters of creating uncertainty, of creating delays, of causing people who are trying to do good to have to reevaluate where they're going to invest capital. So that the thing that we need to give America from Congress is certainty on regulations, certainty on capital, so that these projects can take place. We could talk all day about permitting reform and how that could help provide some certainty. While I'm mentioning permitting reform, your question about working across the aisle, I've been really trying to do a lot of that. We've got a great bill called the Fix Our Forest Act. It got 55 Democrat votes in the House. Unfortunately, the Senate didn't take it up, but we're getting ready to reintroduce that bill. Scott Peters from San Diego, he's an environmental lawyer, and he and I worked to put that bill together. And it took a lot of time with Scott and I. We were on a CODEL, and I had him trapped on an airplane, and I was showing him research papers on what we needed to do to make our forest healthy. And then we went out to the giant sequoias, where we've lost 20% of them in a 2-year period, which is an utter travesty. It's another bad commentary on how we've managed our resources in this country. And Scott gets it, and he's chomping at the bits to file this bill again. There are quite a few Democrats in the House that want to work on permitting reform. We made a valiant effort at the end of the last Congress to do NEPA reform with Senators Manchin and Carper. Senator Brasso and Capito are involved in that as well. But it was a valiant effort, but it also showed me how much we've got to overcome to get together on true permitting reform.
Yeah. Do you think we'll get something done this year?
Yeah, we're looking at how permitting reform affects the budget. So there may be some strategic things we can do in reconciliation. We're certainly exploring all the options on that. Everything that was kind of forcing our colleagues across the aisle to the table to negotiate on permitting reform, all those issues are still there. Right. Whether it's more transmission lines, whether it's being able to permit wind and solar, none of that's gone away. So the levers are all there to bring everybody to the table, and we're still working on it. And I'm very confident that someday we're going to get substantially good permitting reform.
Good. Hopefully that day will be in 2025.
Sooner than later.
Good. So in every good job description, there's that last bullet point that says other duties as assigned. And I think you've gotten an other duty as assigned very early in this Congress in terms of working for ideas in the reconciliation space. And that's what all the buzz is right now. But can you talk a little bit about how you're thinking about opportunities? Because Mike said earlier, this industry is a maker, not a taker. And we certainly see opportunities to contribute here in a constructive way through access to federal lands and waters and the royalties that come from that. But what are you thinking, and how can we help you?
Well, that's a good line I can use with the other committee chairs. Natural resources is a maker, not a taker. And
please, just use it, no attribution.
The numbers to back that up are that if you look at the agencies under the jurisdiction of all the committees, take Energy and Commerce, for example, because they have so much health care under their jurisdiction. Over the next 10-year budget window, their agencies are projected to spend over $8 trillion. Ways and Means, without Social Security and Medicaid included, is $6 or $7 trillion. You get down at the bottom of the list, and the Natural Resources Committee is projected, or the agencies under our committee is projected to return a net $68 billion to the Treasury because of things like royalties and leases. So in this reconciliation process, we want to maximize not only in cutting expenses and regulations, but also in generating more revenue. So we're looking at both sides of the income statement, cost and expenses, which that's exactly what budget reconciliation is all about. But we also have a couple of scorekeepers of CBO and joint tax that haven't always been accurate in their assessments, and especially not on things that fall in the natural resources space or things that fall under energy and commerce and even the tax code. They do a form of static scoring where they don't look at any kind of economic impact. When you talk about resources, one that I like to talk about a lot is the deposits of minerals and elements that we have in the U.S. and the need to mine those. We're so heavily dependent on China for a lot of these rare earths and just normal minerals that we have abundant deposits of here. USGS puts out a report every year along with Commerce that last year showed we had $129 billion worth of raw ore and recyclable materials net of imports and exports. When those materials got processed or refined, they were worth $840 billion. And what do you have to process and refine minerals and elements? You have to have energy, so it plays into everything. That $840 billion of processed material, when it went into the U.S. economy, generated over 3.8 trillion GDP impact. So we see a factor of 30 from taking a resource and putting it out into our economy. CBO or joint tax will never score that. We also know that for every $1 trillion of GDP growth, for the past 50 or 60 years, it's generated 17% federal taxes. So you get $1 trillion of GDP growth, it's $170 billion of revenue coming into the federal government. So we've got to use more realistic scoring so that we can look at the benefits of things like mining, of resource extraction, even the huge numbers that come to the Treasury from oil and gas royalties. That only accounts for a tiny bit of the economic impact when you look at all the supply companies and everything that goes into not only the upstream, but the midstream and the downstream.
It's about 8% of GDP, but we like to say it's the first 8%, because nothing can happen without the energy component.
Exactly. And countries around the world that I think are moving the right way are the ones that are building more energy and are going to have plenty of energy to do the things they need, whether it's AI or data processing or the manufacturing that's never going to go away.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Chairman, I think we could stay and talk for hours here, but I know you've got to get back. You've got a lot going on your schedule, but I think you filled us with optimism today, the opportunity ahead for this country when we think about the natural resources that we have and our ability to extract them in a responsible way for the benefit of the American people and our allies is vast, and your leadership is deeply appreciated. So good luck in getting permitting reform done. Good luck in reconciliation. We stand ready to help you in any way we can. And please join me in thanking Chairman Bruce Westerman. Thank you so much. So you can go down. Thanks. So as we welcome API's President and CEO Mike Sommers to the stage to give his annual State of American Energy address, there are many of you in this audience who know what it's like to work a hard day in the field. But for those of you who are learning about our industry through Paramount's show Landman, I hope you understand that there is a difference between the drama of what goes on in that show and what happens in our safety culture each and every day. So what did API do? We put together a fantastic public service announcement that you may have seen running during the breaks in Landman. And I think it's important for us to see today because there is a juxtaposition between fact and fiction. So with that, why don't we roll the spot?
Don't look for us in hair and makeup or in any casting calls. Our boots, they've never walked a red carpet, because the real job of fueling the country's energy is relentless hard work. And this work happens behind the scenes. Don't get us wrong. When it comes to entertainment, we like a show with thrilling twists and turns too, especially after a long day without any drama in the rigs, in the labs, and in the fields.
Welcome back to the stage, Mike Summers.
Good morning, and thank you all for being here today. Delora Jesus is a member of the Navajo Nation. Her family land allotment has been passed down through generations, and it sits atop an oil field that provides for her family. In 2019, Delora had to go before Congress to argue against restrictive setbacks that threaten her livelihood. The setback ignored the economic realities of families who rely on America's natural resources for income and stability. As a result, Delora dedicated herself to raising awareness about the American oil and gas industry, saying, "I believe in giving back and preserving the values that sustain us." Strong voices like Delora's help clarify the stakes of reversing restrictions on American oil and gas development and embarking on the American energy opportunity. We're honored to have Delora with us today. I tell this story because energy isn't just about lights and gasoline and cars. It's about our national security, economic resilience, and prosperity of families like Delora's. Smart decisions in Washington makes today will shape American families and businesses tomorrow. At this moment, we stand at a crossroads. What kind of energy future do we want? One where we lead, or one where we're left behind? As this election cycle made clear, energy was on the ballot, and American energy won. From coast to coast, voters embraced a future where American energy thrives, prioritizing our own resources over foreign imports, empowering consumers to make their own choices about what to drive and how to cook, streamlining permitting to support big projects, and ensuring our allies can rely on U.S. energy leadership instead of turning to our adversaries. And as we've seen and heard this morning, the stakes are very high, and no opportunity lives forever. History has shown that the pendulum of American politics swings quickly. So America's energy future begins now. As Winston Churchill urged during one of history's darkest hours, we must take action this day. Let's win the American energy opportunity before us. I'm optimistic that a pro-energy Washington will be able to get big things done for a couple of reasons. First, because the American people demand and deserve it. That's why API expanded our 5-point policy roadmap, which is meant to lay the groundwork for unlocking America's energy future. The second reason I'm optimistic is because the incoming administration and new Congress are focused on capitalizing on America's full energy potential, creating jobs, and reinforcing our nation's leadership on the global stage. They can do this by rolling back burdensome rules, reinstating pro-energy policies, and ensuring a clear framework that fosters growth and innovation. We also need to assume that agency actions have a short lifespan. Durable change happens through congressional action, especially when it's bipartisan. Leaders in Washington and in the states have the chance to deliver on the energy reforms that we need. With their support, we can cut through the red tape and chart a lasting path toward U.S. energy leadership. Today, I look forward to sharing the highlights of the API 5-point policy roadmap, which outlines critical actions that we need to take. Along the way, you're going to hear stories like those of Dolores, who embody the stakes of the moment that we're in. First up, protect consumer choice. In recent years, some in Washington have pushed to give a market advantage to electric vehicles. Instead, we want a future where Americans are free to choose the vehicles that work best for them, not for government. We believe that we can achieve shared objectives in a way that respects freedom, affordability, and practicality. Mandates shouldn't lift options or strain budgets. Let's ensure consumers can choose the transportation that works for them. It's about ensuring that Americans are free to choose what works while supporting innovation and American energy security. Take Kevin Boland. He's a dirt track racer from New Brighton, Pennsylvania, with 100-plus wins and a spot in the Beaver County Sports Hall of Fame. Kevin loves his work, his community, and his machine shop that specializes in engine repair. While he's not opposed to EVs, he values his ability to choose what fits his business, his budget, and his lifestyle. Kevin has spent his life working with internal combustion engines, from two-strokes to V8s, and his expertise powers not only his racing success, but also the livelihoods of those who depend on his shop. For Kevin and millions of other small business owners, reliable energy and consumer freedom are an essential ingredients of success. Kevin's story reflects the views of millions of Americans who don't want the government telling them what to do. This year, they spoke loud and clear about protecting their rights to pick the cars and trucks that they love. Kevin is here today, along with his brother, Keith. Thank you both for being with us. Now it's time for our leaders to act. We're asking the incoming administration to end the mandates that restrict consumer choice on the road. Second on our policy roadmap, we need to bolster American geopolitical strength. During the Trump administration, the first time, America achieved a historic milestone, becoming a net energy exporter. Yet in the middle of multiple wars in energy-critical regions and record-high global gas demand, one of the most promising opportunities for U.S. energy leadership was put on hold. The current administration's decision to halt permitting for liquefied natural gas exports created doubt about America's commitment to supporting allies and its global reputation as a reliable trade partner. American LNG exports have driven job creation, economic growth, and environmental benefits. Pausing new projects puts these advantages at risk, not just for the U.S., but for the world. The LNG pause sets up the incoming Trump administration for one of the easiest policy layups ever. Walk in on day one and hit the play button on American LNG again. End the pause, put people to work, and increase our competitive edge against China and Russia. As someone said earlier to me today, we need to chill, baby, chill. When it comes to bolstering geopolitical strength, American trade policy should reflect the importance of maintaining global energy flows, which includes U.S. exports as well as imports. Restoring American competitiveness, of course, is a worthy goal. The best way to do it is creating the conditions that enable us to produce energy freely. The third point on our roadmap is leveraging our natural resources. Last year, the U.S. did not have an offshore lease sale for the first time since 1966. And now, in its final days, the current administration has moved to ban new oil and natural gas development across 625 million acres of federal waters. This unilateral action reverses and ignores decades of bipartisan agreement to leverage our natural resources safely and responsibly. API urges policymakers to use every tool at their disposal to reverse this politically motivated decision and restore a pro-American energy approach to federal leasing. We also look forward to refreshed efforts to ensure that we have an offshore leasing program that is robust enough to secure America's energy future. Similarly, we need to resume strong production onshore. Congress should also repeal EPA's natural gas tax, which imposes costs on consumers and undermines our competitiveness. The fourth stop on the roadmap is one of the most pressing. Let's work with both parties to reform our permitting system once and for all. Since 2000, the time to move an energy infrastructure project to go from permit to operation has more than doubled. Many projects take a decade or more to approve, or never happen at all. We tallied the costs from 10 pipelines and other major projects that were canceled because of permitting delays in the past few years, and we found $34 billion of capital expenditures. That's money that could have been channeled to innovation and to job creation. Permitting reform undermines every other aspect of our roadmap. It's the foundation of our progress. We can have the best laid plans, the best resources, and the best resolve, yet it means nothing if we can't move from blueprint to operation. That's why we support reform, which must include judicial reform, as well as changes to the National Environmental Policy Act and the Clean Water Act. It's time to move from rhetoric to action, working with Congress to pass meaningful, bipartisan permitting reform that benefits all Americans. Finally, our roadmap includes advancing sensible tax policy. In the first Trump administration, the President and Congress worked to pass pro-growth tax reform. They delivered policies like bonus depreciation, which acted as a proven economic booster, creating opportunities to lay thousands of miles of pipeline. Our industry took it from there. New investment, new innovation, new output, and helping America lower its emissions to levels that no other industrialized economy has seen. Extending key provisions like bonus depreciation will yield even greater results this time because they'll be paired with other policies within our roadmap. They'll ensure energy investments occur here, not China. And they'll ensure that we don't merely maintain the 11 million jobs our industry currently supports, but that we add more to them in the decades to come. API proudly works with partners like North America's building trades unions to ensure that they have good-paying jobs to support American families. Speaking of family, Alta Baker is a small business owner from Louisiana. She builds blast-resistant structures for a range of entities, from providing shelter to the military to protecting Americans overseas. She also partners with the American oil and gas industry. She credits pro-growth policies with giving her business the stability it needs to thrive. In fact, Alta told me that API's resources, including more than 800 industry standards and supplier workshops, have strengthened her company's safety training programs and equipped her with valuable tools to compete and to win. Today, Alta is preparing to pass her business on to her daughter, Vicki, ensuring that a legacy of hard work and dedication flows to the next generation. Alta and Vicki are here with us today. Let's give them a round of applause for all they've accomplished and the legacy that they're building. Let's work together to create a tax environment that fosters innovation and secures our energy future for decades to come. As we look ahead to Inauguration Day, Alta, Vicki, Kevin, Keith, and Delora remind us what's at stake. As we take action this day, let's keep their stories in mind. Let's protect Kevin's right to choose what car to drive. Let's honor Delora's dedication to preserving the values that sustain her family and her community. Let's maintain a pro-growth tax reform framework that enables small businesses like Alta's to continue to thrive. And most importantly, let's seize the American energy opportunity to deliver the bold leadership that our nation demands and deserves. America's energy future begins now. Let's seize it. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. This concludes the 2025 State of American Energy. please visit lightsonenergy.org/roadmap or scan the QR code to read API's 5-point energy roadmap.